Well, hello, friends. Here we are. This was my first message as senior pastor of Grace Church. It's weird to say, but it doesn't actually feel all that different. Not a lot has changed in my life yet. I'm sure it'll sink in a few weeks. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about what I shared this weekend, and hopefully it'll give you guys some good discussion points as you talk more about this whole concept of self-giving love. As I mentioned, this will be the first of 3 weeks where I talk about some kind of really big categories of what I think define Grace Church, and in many ways define what I believe as the core of following Jesus. The next couple weeks are going to be really interesting. We're going to talk next week about truth and what do we see as the point of reading Scripture and all that, listening to the Spirit. It's going to be good. And then the week after that, we are going to talk all about what it means for us as a community to be a refuge in the storm. To live up to our name as a church, to be a place of grace where everyone is welcome and all that's entailed in that. So today, though, I want to talk again about self-giving love. Now, like I said, I've mentioned this a lot. I use this phrase a lot. You're going to get tired of hearing me say it, but I tend to think of self-giving love as pretty much the core of what it means to follow Jesus. Jesus talks about carrying your cross and following him. It is a matter of surrender. It is a matter of sacrifice to follow Jesus. And when we are interacting with one another, at least Paul is calling us to have that exact same attitude that Jesus had when he died for all of humanity. We are called to set aside our own interests, our own desires, to set aside our own power and status and wealth and all of it for the sake of others. And most provocatively in Philippians 2, he calls us to actually think of others as better than ourselves. Okay, this is wild stuff. Now, if you look at Philippians 2, again, this is written to a very Roman-loving community. Is a really big deal. Philippi was in Greece, but it was a Roman colony, and it was a really big deal to be a Roman citizen. One of the unique, things that the Roman emperor gave to Philippi was that it was considered a part of Rome. So if you were actually in Philippi, the soil under your feet was considered part of Rome, even though it was many miles away. So people in Philippi, being a Roman citizen was a really big deal. But Paul basically says, yeah, that's not true for you. If you're following Jesus, you're not a citizen of Rome. You are a citizen of heaven. The soil under your feet is the kingdom of heaven. It's not Rome. It's God's kingdom. So to talk throughout the rest of the book about what does it look like to be a citizen of heaven, he uses this beautiful poem in verse 6 of chapter 2, this poem or hymn, we don't really know. He talks about Jesus in these very lyrical terms to describe what kind of attitude we are meant to have. And that attitude is an attitude of self-giving love. Now, I talked all about this in the sermon, but the thing that is most provocative about this poem is the idea of Jesus humbling himself. I mentioned that in many ways, I think a better English word that would get across the idea to us better is humiliate or humiliation. It was as if Jesus humiliated himself for the sake of others. That is the kind of love that we are supposed to have for one another. It's crazy. If you want to take a little bit of a deeper dive into these verses here, I would encourage you to go back to the book of Isaiah. Go back to chapter 52, starting in verse 13, where the prophet Isaiah talks about what we call as the suffering servant. Excuse me. The suffering servant is one of 4 servant songs, and we're going to talk more about this in a little bit, in a few weeks actually, when we talk about part of Isaiah. But if you look at Isaiah 52, verse 13, and all the way through chapter 53, what you'll find is a story of a servant of God who sets aside his own life to save humanity, to save others and bring them life. And what you'll find is that the arc of that story and even the elevation of that servant of God at the end follows closely with this. And you can see that whether Paul wrote this or if he was just quoting it, this poem was very much inspired by what we see in Isaiah. So that's something I would love, if you've got time, read that as a group, talk about what you see as the similarities between Isaiah 52 and 53 and Philippians 2 verses 6 through 11, and see what comes to light for you. It's one of the things I love the most about Scripture is when you start to connect these dots and start to see these truths coming together in beautiful ways. Talk about that together. But then I also really would love for you to talk about primarily this. what makes you most uncomfortable about this? Not about, what Jesus did. We're all comfortable with Jesus, giving up his life for us, maybe. But what's really uncomfortable is when we think about what that looks like in our life. So I'd love for you to think about this. What does it make you feel when you imagine giving of yourself, of self-giving love? Where does that seem difficult? Where does that seem impossible? What is it about loving another person and thinking of them as better than yourself that rubs you the wrong way? These are the things that we need to talk about if we are going to move forward as a community in this. But another thing I'd love for you to talk about is, how do you feel about some of the things I said I saw in the future of Grace? I talked about self-giving love looking like becoming a multi-generational community where we are willingly spending time and engaging with people who are not our age, older, younger, different life stages, as a way of learning from one another. I suggested that younger people, we need to get over ourselves and we need to start listening to our elders. And I talked about those of us who are older, we need to step aside and start letting younger people lead as we become mentors. What do you think about that? What do you think about me talking about us becoming a multicultural community? I know we're in Hamilton County and Marion County, but what do you think about the fact that our world is changing so rapidly and we have the opportunity to actually join in with that change and be ahead of it and be ready for what God is doing with the global church? What do you think about that? And finally, what do you think about what I said regarding compassion, especially in this time, which is so divided and so hate-filled? How do you feel about the idea of self-giving love playing out in the interactions that we have with people from the Black community, people from other minority communities who are facing so much pain and grief right now? Talk about that. Have open conversations, because we are never going to make a change. We are never going to see change happen in our community unless we are willing to have these conversations with one another and with our world. So friends, I gave you a lot to think about. And I know that these next few months and years are going to be filled with a lot of adventure, a lot of highs and a lot of lows. But I got to tell you, regardless, I am so eager to be with you on this journey as we explore together what it looks like to practice self-giving love in the model of Jesus in 2020 and 2021 and 2022 and beyond. I can't wait to be with you on this journey, guys. I love you all, and I'm looking forward to talking more. See you soon.